Gina, I'm excited to have you with me today. Gina Stracuzzi runs the Women in Sales programs at the Institute for Excellence in Sales. Gina, why do we bring on Juliana today? Introduce yourself and then give us a little bit of an idea on why we're having today's LinkedIn Live.
Thank you, Fred. Hi, everyone. As Fred said, I'm his partner in crime, and I run the Women in Sales programs at IAS, which is like my joy and honor. So last week or 2 weeks ago, I guess now, Fred and I attended GAIN as a sponsor, and it was just a phenomenal day. And we gathered so much information from that. Fred and I both come from a little bit of a marketing background as well as sales. And we've always been very cognizant of the relationship and the working struggle sometimes between marketing and sales. And really what Juliana and her facilitators and speakers highlighted that day was just how integrated this conversation, these relationships have become now. There isn't a lot of just, okay, we did our part, now it's your turn, take it over, right? It's all changing. And as people who work with sales leaders and marketing leaders, we have really seen up close and personal how difficult those relationships have become, not in a tense way, but people trying to figure out their parts. And what Juliana and her guests really spoke about came home to Fred and I. So I'm super excited that we're having this conversation, because this is the woman who knows, she's got her finger on that pulse. And so I'm super excited about this conversation.
Yeah, and there's so many other factors that we've talked about at the Institute for Excellence in Sales so many times. You know, there's data that the customer may be 60% through their sales process before they even engage the sales professionals. And 15, 20 years ago, sales professionals used to be walking brochures, and customers would bring us in to go through our strategy. I worked at Apple Computer for a long time, and I remember doing 3 days of product presentations to our customers. Yeah. Customers can go into ChatGPT now and type in, what is Apple's product strategy? So a lot of the roles are being defined, etc. So Gina, I'm glad that you're going to be here. Juliana, it's so exciting to see you here as well. Your presentation that we saw you give at GAIN was phenomenal. Your presentation at the Carasoft Partner Summit was phenomenal as well. So Gina and I really dug into what you were saying, and we're so thrilled to have you here. Why don't you give us a brief intro, and then why don't you tell us why did GBR create the GovBuyer's Journey Framework?
Thank you so much for having me on board, Fred and Gina. First of all, my name is Juliana Slye. I'm the CEO of Government Business Results. We're a small woman-owned firm headquartered in Northern Virginia, but with team members spread across the U.S. We help tech companies effectively build their go-to-markets, so marketing and sales align together for the high-tech public sector markets. And I'm so glad that we had the opportunity to cross paths at the Carasoft Marketing Summit in August, and then at GAIN in October. My opportunity to chair the GAIN conference this year was truly one of my highlights of the year. We worked with a team of over 50 different speaking professionals from across the public sector community to develop really powerful panels, as well as presentations that I think hit some very contemporary themes. So I'm glad that you all found such great value in the conference. I'm looking forward to continuing on with the team there. In terms of the GovBuyer's Journey Framework, thank you for allowing me to have an opportunity to talk about it. I'm a bit of a geek, so I'm going to geek out for a moment if you don't mind. There are many B2B buyers frameworks out there, but they don't extend into the government space because of the unique structure inside of B2G, the regulations, and the decision-making processes that are inherent inside of government today. So we created the GovBuyer's Journey as a way to really provide a clear roadmap for marketers and sellers inside of the public sector who need to be able to understand how government buyers today make purchasing decisions and the path that they have to travel so that they can really meet their buyer along that journey. By aligning the buyer's specific needs and concerns and motivations at each stage with recommendations for content and activity and engagement. We provide this blueprint that marketers and sellers can align to really deliver a comprehensive experience for their public sector buyer. And, of course, along the way, really do all of the great things that we know need to be done inside of sales, which is really making sure that we're addressing buyers' concerns and reducing the complexity of the sale, and at the same time reducing the speed to close.
Good stuff.
Done right, it can be really incredibly effective. And I've got a couple of stats here that I'm hoping I can go ahead and share with you. And let me go ahead and let's see, find the right button to do that. That's the key.
Yeah, I just got one quick question as you move into those slides.
Sure.
We've heard the term buyer's journey, and you mentioned it's in multiple contexts, if you will. Clarify exactly what a buyer's journey is for us.
Will do. So right before we get there, though, a buyer's journey is it's a term most of us think about what the seller's journey is. So when we come to working with the buyer, we'll think about it from our standpoint. And let me go ahead and stop the screen share really quickly. We'll think about what are the steps that we need to take to make sure that we've met all of the needs of the buyer and the process in the sale. And oftentimes we'll codify these into an acronym BANT, right? Have I discovered that they've got enough budget, authority, need, timing, things like that? Well, the buyer's journey is looking at things from the buyer's point of view, right? So a buyer's journey basically maps out the stages that a potential buyer goes through from first recognizing they have a problem all the way through to making that final purchase decision. So it's about understanding that map of awareness, consideration, and decision, but from the buyer's perspective. It's really interesting. It's a way, and particularly in public sector, it's a way to map the decision makers and the influencers and the detail steps really kind of on a single sheet of paper, if you will, so that you can start to build your sales and your marketing strategies from the buyer-centric point of view. Does that make sense?
It does. And I know you're going to take it through some slides, but I want to have some specific questions about the federal government. So we have a lot of people listening today or watching the LinkedIn Live who are in B2B, and of course, a lot are in B2G. And your company obviously focuses on B2G, business to government. At the Institute for Excellence in Sales, we focus on B2B, business to business, and business to government. What are some of the specific challenges, before you get into some of the framework elements, what are some of the specific challenges that have emerged over the past decade that make selling to the federal government more complex? And do these same things apply to B2B?
Right. So it's a great question. I like to say that B2G trails B2B by about 5 years. And so that said, there are some unique differences. So first is this shift from a highly regulated purchasing process to something that is a little bit more chaotic and complex. So what do I mean by that? There is absolutely, without a doubt, a very regulated manner in which government agencies have to procure IT goods and services. However, in the government's attempt to actually speed up the purchase process, they've actually introduced a little bit of chaos and a little bit of complexity. Things like OTAs, other transaction authorities, as well as other procurement mechanisms that were meant to enable shortcuts for public sector buyers to be able to gain their IT more quickly, have actually introduced a level of chaos. The buyer isn't necessarily aware of what they can do. They might be a little bit confused as to the steps. And then you've got, you wrap in the rest of the regulations around it and add in COVID and some of the huge agency-wide or segment-wide contracts that have come on the scene lately that we tend to see in the publications as being hotly contested. All of this has shifted the landscape, shortened the buying cycles, some of the buying cycles, while lengthening others. So this shift to a more chaotic and complex buying process is one thing. The second is an increased focus on compliance and security. So for many of the government agencies out there, everything has to pass a compliance and a security test because of the ever increasing tempo of threats, both insider threat and external threats to the agency, and there's the need to both protect our citizens as well as protect our secure assets like data. And then the third, and I'm hoping we have an opportunity to talk about this a little bit later, is this rise of self-educated buyers. And this is something that's uniquely come out since COVID. Buyers today are more interested in educating themselves than talking to a sales rep. So Fred, you talked a moment ago about, you would go in and do product demos or product roadmap updates back in the days of your time as a sales rep with Apple. In many cases today, we're seeing government buyers and B2B buyers spending more time online than talking to sales. So we have shifted from a sales-led buyer experience really to a self-educated buyer experience. And that is something that we're seeing in both camps, B2B and B2G.
Yeah, and that whole dynamic has forced sales professionals to provide much more value than they've ever had to provide before. And that's something that we talk at the Institute for Excellence in Sales all the time is the customer only needs you if you're providing some type of value that they can't get anywhere else.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's get to your slide, and then we want to talk about the 7 stages of that. But I also want to go back to something you said a few seconds ago, which is 5 years behind B2B. Is it, in what aspects is it 5 years behind? Is it just now that the B2G has introduced a whole new layer of chaos? Which I had to chuckle because I've been in government sales in one way or the other for a long time. And there's never ending layers of chaos. And, they should not fix what's already broken because it only gets worse. But yeah.
It does. So let's talk about the 5 years, right? So typically, and I see this on the marketing side as well as the selling side, where we started to see B2B enterprise sales really sort of pick up in motion, I want to say is right around 2010, when you had a MarTech stack that could actually execute and a more personalized approach to that B2B buyer, right? That was a wonderful thing. So you would have Marketo and Salesforce, and they're all working together, and your marketers are able to really tee up these beautiful personalized emails. They're able to understand and track what's happening with the buyer. Meanwhile, and all of this is working brilliantly on the B2B side. Meanwhile, on the B2G side, the DoD has stripped out HTML emails. Half of the federal civilian guys won't take HTML-based emails, and HTML is where the cookies are hidden so that you can understand who opened what. So you had this really rich MarTech stack happening within B2B, and you had sales reps who were able to really leverage all of the power and capability of Salesforce and gain insights into their customers. And meanwhile, on the B2G side, we were still blind. And still are blind to a great degree. So when I talk about being behind the curve, it's because of some of the regulations and the way that government agencies do business that prevent government agencies and their sellers from really engaging at a deeper level, right? And so some of this shifts over time, and certainly now we're able to have, a little bit more visibility, a little bit more engagement, a little bit of a deeper engagement. But by the same token, in government's desire to really improve the rate at which they adopt technology, because it's not only a workload and automation and an efficiency issue, but it's really a security issue. You really can't protect those machines that are on Windows 95, right? So there is a deep desire to modernize to support national security interests and even state security interests at the state and local level. So as they really kind of leaned into wanting to adopt and modernize, they said, you know what? The existing procurement regulations don't allow us to do it, so we'll just craft some new ones. And now, based on whatever your purchase is, you can either go this way or you can go this way, at which point now the government buyer is confused and saying, okay, which way do I go again? How do I do this? And so that's what I'm talking about, if that makes sense.
Perfect. Thank you for that explanation.
Yeah, so take us through the 7 steps, and then actually after you kind of give us that overview, I want to follow up on Gina's question here, and you actually alluded to this before, that the people who are in government IT, they want to bring in great technology into their agencies. But I love the way you described the block, the chasm, if you will, between what they can accept, from industry and how they have to be self-educated to follow it up. So take us through the framework, and then let's address the whole concept of how do we help them be self-educated, right? And how do we still provide the value, knowing that they want to be up to speed, et cetera?
You bet. So I'm a big fan of with them. What's in it for me? So we have a wonderful LinkedIn Live audience who are thinking, so yeah, great, there's this framework. What's in it for me? And so I like to lead with that. So what's in it for you? 66% increase in open rates, 170% higher click rate, 14% higher click-through rates. These are marketing stats. On the sales side, 2x increase in 12 months or a 4x increase in 18 months. What are all of these stats? So one of the things that we talk about, and I know as a seller, you feel this right here, is that there is a need to do more with less. And at this point, there is your pipeline is always hungry. And so when your pipeline is always hungry, you can do one of two things. You can turn the faucet on higher, right? So increase the amount of leads coming through, or you can double your pipeline by doubling the conversion rate of the leads that you already have. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking to you about today is how to have more efficient conversations with your prospects. And for the marketers who are in the audience, this is about really improving the quality of your marketing pipeline as you're transferring into sales. And so when we take a look at the government buyer's journey, the first thing that we do is we understand that the average government sales cycle is between 12 and 18 months, which is to say that some of them are 9 months and some of them are 36 months, but we average it out to about 12 to 18 months, right? And so within that time frame, the government buyer is doing many different things. I like to kind of coalesce them around the 3 Ps, right? So the first is they're talking to other people. They're having peer discussions, team alignment, peer references, and executive alignment. The second is they're focused on the problem at hand. They're exploring the problem. They're doing research around the problem as well as their agency standards. They're doing solution research and product research. Now, as far as the differences between B2B and B2G, B2B is doing exactly the same thing for the first 2 rows. Where we start to really differentiate B2G is that third row of procurement. So the way that government agencies have to buy things, they're really starting in that motion of RFI, RFPs, value exploration, RFQs, and then proper procurement. So these 3 Ps, people, problem, procurement, are what your buyer is working through, whether they're B2B or B2G. And the reality is we see them at a variety of different steps along the way. We see them in government, we see them in industry days, in both B2B and B2G. We see them in conferences, we see them in seminars and webinars and demos. Marketers who are on the line, where are my marketers at? We're orchestrating all of this, right? So we're orchestrating these touch points and enabling them to happen. However, if you think about it, it's a lot of work that the government buyer has to do. And so we brought forward the government buyer's journey as a way of understanding where the government buyer is in this problem set of people, problem, and procurement. One of the biggest differences between the B2G buyer's journey and the B2B buyer's journey is in that very first step. In most cases in the B2B environment, the customers you are dealing with understand their problems from an intrinsic basis. We need to increase shareholder profitability. We need to increase profits. We need to tamp down on costs. These are not the same motivators that exist in government. Many government agencies today have an unbelievable amount of priorities that they're working through. So think about the Veterans Administration, or you can think about it from the IRS perspective, or even the state of Oregon perspective. All of them have just a laundry list of priorities that they're working through, so much so that their priority list exceeds their resource and attention span list. And so what often has to happen is there needs to be a catalyst that knocks them out of status quo before they will turn their lens to a new problem. So that is the first and perhaps the most significant difference between the 2 buyers' journeys. Where the B2B is intrinsic, the B2G is an external catalyst driven. So something comes to knock that agency out of their status quo. It's a new policy, it's a new memo, it could be a socioeconomic challenge, there could be a war that pops up. It is something that is a significant impact to the path and pattern that the agency was currently on. So once that happens, there is typically a very discrete set of steps that the government agency takes in order to acquire the technology and the services that they need to address that catalyst. We've codified these steps into 7 discrete stages: initiative, research, assess, decision, deploy, renew, cross-grade, and upgrade. Deploy and renew have their own spin-off cycles, as you see. But for the most part, the work that we do as marketers and sellers is really kind of keyed into those first 4 stages: initiative, research, assess, and decision. It's those 4 stages that typically take between 12 and 18 months. There's a special conversation we can have around deploy, renew, cross-grade, and upgrade. There's, and I'm chomping at the bit to get into that conversation with folks. But for most folks, it's really the first 4 stages that we're talking about. And so as we take a look at these first 4 stages, there's a lot going on, and we look at it as jobs the buyer is trying to do. So if you think about the procurement paths, and by the way, these are the actual procurement processes for the Civ side, the DoD side, and I picked a random state, the state of Oregon. It's incredibly complex. Gartner calls it, on the enterprise side, which is very similar to some of the complexity you see here, they call it a long, hard slog, is what they call it. So we see this on the B2B side as well as the B2G side. But there are 8 discrete steps or jobs that the government buyer is trying to get done during these 4 stages. Their first step is loosening the status quo. Does this catalyst really affect me? Do I really have to change? I don't want to change because I understand that there's a lot that I'm going to have to do here. Do I really have to change? And how does it affect me? The second is committing to change, where they go, okay, I understand this affects me. Now I have to get my entire agency's team aligned behind the fact that they now have to focus on this change and solve this problem. Then underneath research, they're exploring methodologies. So they're really looking at technologies and methodologies. Okay, so we've agreed as a team that we have to solve this problem. What solution set are we looking at? And then from there, they start to build their requirements list. Once they build their requirements list, the next step is to evaluate solutions to determine whether or not they meet the requirements list. And then they commit to a solution. Once they commit to a solution, they have to go back out and do alignment building and get the agency aligned behind the decision. So they have to justify the decision, and then they have to tee up procurement to actually execute the decision or the capabilities. So that is really the nexus of it. And so how does it affect a buyer and a seller? Well, realistically, there are different needs in each step. So for example, the buyer might be thinking, something new just crossed my radar. What is it? How does it affect me? As a team, we need to agree to make the changes. So the buyer is then thinking, what kind of technology will help us? We need a requirements list so we can evaluate vendors. Followed by which vendor solution meets our needs and our list of requirements. We need to align the team to pick a single solution and vendor. And then we need, with the vendor identified, we now need to convince our stakeholders. And then we've got to set up procurement quickly. There's also a different set of questions that they process through as well. And as I scroll through these questions, one of the things that should become apparent is that it requires a different set of information at each step. And this is really the key to the buyer's journey, because if you are timing your message and your information, whether you're a marketer or a seller, to a certain step and it misfires and doesn't align and hit your buyer at the right time, they're not likely to recognize it. It's like walking into an Apple store for the first time and having somebody come up to you and say, if you give me your credit card right now, I'll give you a 25% discount. And you're thinking, whoa, 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 I'm just trying to figure out what iPhone I wanted, right? So that's the misalignment we're talking about and that we're trying to correct. It's understanding where our buyer is in their methodology and their thought process and their buyer's journey, so that we can meet them where they are with the information they need to move forward to the next step. Because here's the magic. If you can hit the buyer with the right information at the right time, every sales rep out there knows, you shrink the sales cycle, right? And you really tee it up more effectively. The last slide that I have on this is, and this is the challenge on the government side, it's a team sport. It's not just one persona. And we see this in enterprise on the B2B side as well. but it really is multiple personas that you're dealing with in the buy cycle who are all going through this journey together. And so with that, I will pause and ask if there are any questions.
Yeah, I have a question. So we've heard the stat before in the B2B side of 60%. The customer is 60% down the road before they even call in sales. And that's something that's been kicked off by the challenger sale and continues to go about. And what happens is, let's say the customer is ready to engage you and you're the sales rep. You don't have to go back to step one, right?
No.
And you did a great job explaining this, is where do you come in to be able to provide the value? So talk about that for a second or two, is what is some of the work you're doing to educate sales and marketing about, because typically we want to start from the beginning. We want to educate, we want to talk about our technology and the market. And we feel if we're given this gift of being in tune with the customer, that we have to comprise 60% of stuff. But the reality is, like you just said, the customer's already researched the 20, 25, 30, 50, 60%. Now we need to come in at the right place. So you mentioned the word magic. What is some of your advice?
Well,
and then I know Gina has some good follow-up questions as well, but what's your education?
Yeah,
What is your insights on for that?
I'm sorry, I know there's a delay. I want to integrate my question into Fred's because it's very related. Is in this new journey, I can see just from your visuals there that the integration of sales and marketing, I mean, I can see them being at the table on all the way together now versus a handoff. And so is that what sales organizations should be thinking about, is like, let's not do this handoff, let's do it let's work together, since the buyer is doing half the work ahead of time, right? So thinking about Fred's question, integrate mine in there too, if you would.
Absolutely. So think about the buyer's journey this way, right? The reps, the sales reps used to be more in control of the journey than they were today. And so there's an acceptance there. Your buyer, if you're a seller, your buyer has already spent a significant amount of time by themselves self-educating before they're willing to even talk with you. So I think step one is understanding that. And I think meeting them where they are, more than ever, it's the conversation. Hi, what do you know about us already? What have you heard about us? But more importantly, I would actually set that aside and say, what problem are you trying to solve and what have you evaluated so far? Where are you in your process for solving the problem? And I think actually taking a moment and doing that pulse check of understanding where they have been already is more critical than ever. And it's not a question that we would typically ask in the past in a sales process, but I think it's what we have to ask now, because we have to catch up to where our buyer is. Because otherwise, if you don't, you're going to be firing all sorts of messages at them and missing them, because where you're firing, they no longer are. And worse than that, you're going to start to ditch some of your credibility because you're not listening or not asking the questions about where they are in their journey and where their problem set is. So that's step one. And then Gina, the integrated approach that you talked about, this is my big, sort of banner moment that I'm really driving out there. One of the things I loved about the GAIN conference is there was a panel on MQL to SQL conversion. And one of the panelists, Darcy Hunt, stood up and said, in our company, we no longer refer to ourselves as field marketers, we are revenue marketers. And I couldn't agree more. The integration between sales and marketing is more critical than ever, because if you think about those steps and that journey and the rise of the self-educated government buyer, you're realizing, if you're a sales rep, hang on a second, if these guys are spending more time online than talking to me, that's my marketer. That is absolutely my marketer putting that information out there. So how can I work more closely with my marketer? And in the past, we used to have this really great, we talked about it all the time, sales and marketing collaboration. And collaboration meant, hi, I've done my piece, you now go do yours. The reality is the new sales marketing motion, and I'm using that as a single word, sales-marketing motion or marketing-sales motion, is interlinked. It takes ABM and the concept of ABM to a whole new level. but there needs to be a common backbone and a common blueprint for sales and marketing to work from, so that they can interleave their efforts, knowing that as soon as that buyer gets off the line with a sales rep, marketing was talking to them initially and all of their self-education and their research, they get on the phone, they talk to a seller to get a couple of pieces of information they need. They now go back and do more research online armed with that information, right? It is an interleaving. And that is what I'm really like driving forward these days.
That's awesome.
Sorry, I get really passionate and geeky about this. So there's a lot here.
Really great. So let's talk a little bit about what needs to change. Well, we talked, you kind of hit that a little bit on what needs to change in the sales and marketing organization. And it really seems like it's a full-on mindset shift in that, now we cannot assume that people are starting at point zero. But I really liked what you said, that the fact that they're coming into the picture self-educated, we're going to hope that that means they've seen a lot of what we've done on the marketing side, that they've looked at our stuff, not just other people's stuff, and that we are part of that mix of information that they have gleaned. And, now we're going to use it, but how do we use it? And how can they really take this and use it and be successful moving into 2025?
So it's great question, a lot there. I want to back up something you said. You said, so they've gone online and hopefully they've looked at our information versus our competitors' information. They will look at whatever information is there that they can find. Two really important distinctions. Whatever is out there. And so if you don't have enough information out there that meets every step of the journey, I bet your competitor does. And number two, is it where they can find it? Yeah. Where are they going for it? And this is where marketing really comes in handy, right? Not handy, but marketing is really required at this point. Understanding where your buyer goes for information requires understanding your buyer better. And so we used to kind of look to the sales team as, okay, you guys are going to know your buyer better than anybody else. How can we support you? What do you need? That marketer needs to have deep demographic data and a data-driven understanding of where that buyer is, so that they understand where to meet that buyer with the information that's necessary at that step. And guess what? Different steps have the buyers do different things and go to different places in those steps. And so you've got to make sure that you're really kind of driving through the whole buyer's journey in that way. But it's about personalized engagement that meets the buyer where they are. And on the sales side, we've talked a little bit about, the sales rep getting in there and having some of those one-to-one conversations to better understand that. But on the marketing side, we have to use data-driven insights and personas to really nail that.
One thing you mentioned before, it's a great answer. You also mentioned ABM, account-based marketing. And I think one of the things I'm getting from this conversation very clearly, and we're talking with Juliana Slye with GBR. My name is Diamond, Gina Stracuzzi from the Institute for Excellence in Sales. There's a lot of debate because of AI and things like that. Are salespeople even going to be valid moving forward, right? And even marketing people for that matter. One of the great things is that sales professionals who understand the value they need to bring specifically for the customer, right? It's no longer kind of broad. Oh, gee, you have these challenges, you're in IT, here's what we do, do you need it? How can we fit it in? How can we squeeze in what we do into what you're up to? But it's like understanding specifically what's going on at the customer, where they're going, where their agency direction is going, where their mission. Again, we're doing today's interview in the middle of November 2024. We just had an election. We're seeing things come out in the news about things that may happen across the government. So, understanding 3, 4, 5 steps down the road, right? The great sales professionals in B2G are the ones who can have real conversations with their government customers about where their agency is going, where the mission is going. It's not just about here's how my technology may not be able to help. So give us some of your insights, Juliana Slye, on some other things from the sales side that you believe sales professionals should be doing to be successful? And maybe you could talk about some things they could do with marketing, to tie in Gina's great point that there's more interplay, integration, not just like at the quote unquote whole old handoff, but early in, right? And throughout the process, and both organizations are valuable.
Yeah, no, Fred, I completely agree with you. And I think if anybody ever says, sales is going away, that is absolutely not the case in any stretch of the imagination. So Gartner and Forrester have done some great work on this on the B2B side. And let me kind of step back a little bit. So we talk about the rise of the self-educated buyer. If you step all the way back, for about 20 years, we had sales-led education throughout the buying cycle. And what would happen is marketers would, develop a lead and at some point turn it over to sales. Well, Forrester and Gartner have identified that for about the first 20 years, for the last 20 years, up until about 2019, I'll call it, there were about 17 touches in an enterprise sale, from let me identify the lead to let me close the lead. And somewhere around touches 4, 5, and 6, marketing would turn it over to sales, and sales would grab it at that point and run it the rest of the way. And to your great point, and some of what we've been talking about earlier, the government buyer would turn to the sales rep and say, so tell me about the product. Can you do a demo for me, right? And the sales rep was the concierge who then brought the educational pieces to the buyer. Well, fast forward from 2020 to about 2024, what Gartner and Forrester have understood is the touches, those 17 touches, be they web touches or sales rep touches or conference touches, any time where the vendor had an opportunity to have a touch point in any capacity with the buyer, has now flipped to 27 touches. So we've almost doubled, but that doubling didn't come. Well, so we've doubled. And then in terms of that doubling to 27 touch points, they've identified that 15 of them are digital. So 15 out of 27, marketing's in charge of the pipeline more so than sales. Think about that. Your buyer is spending more time online than talking to sales reps, right? So you have this dramatic shift in the amount of touch points. On the government side, that number almost doubles to 40 touch points or more, depending upon which segment you're in, right? So let's talk about that for a moment. But in terms of your sales rep and their importance, the amount of touches that a sales rep has with a buyer hasn't changed. What has changed is the amount of touches the marketer has. It's nearly doubled. Okay, so sales reps aren't going anywhere. And if you really need to validate that point, I want you to think about Carvana versus your local Ford dealership. Carvana is a service where you go online, you figure out what you want, you order it, the car shows up. You don't deal with the sales rep. Yet they've been around for like 5 years and they haven't taken off. Why is that? Well, as buyers want to buy from a person. The larger the purchase, the more of a human connection is necessary. Our government agencies today are in a huge chaotic spin, and they need trusted advisors. On the B2B side, your enterprise buyer need trusted advisors. They want and need to cultivate a relationship with somebody who can help them navigate through this. The sales rep's role is never going away. I firmly believe that. However, what does need to happen and what the reps need to really focus on is understanding the buyer's behavior and the journey that they're on, so that they can more effectively connect. But then they need to turn inward to their company and work on training their teams on that as well. So marketers can get really data-driven, but having sales reps really work with them to really understand some of the more specific mechanics around the buyer's behavior is critical. So think about that integration. And if I'm advising a sales rep, what I'm going to say to you is, you are no longer a party of one at the table. You have yourself, you have your SC, and you have your marketer, and the three of you are working together on that journey and should have a shared vision of what that journey is and the role that each of you are playing. Does that make sense? And did that answer your question, Fred?
Yeah. So
Oh, sorry, I was muted.
that leads nicely into a question I have, Juliana, excuse me, is thinking about the content creation.
Yeah.
And as a marketing tactic to influence that buyer's journey. And there's so many, now it's so critical. I mean, you know, it used to be that people were so concerned with SEO, you know, like making sure they were optimized and they would come up top of the list. Now there are so many competing things with that, as Fred alluded to, you know, you even go into AI and say very specifically, you know, what can Apple give me? What can Salesforce give me? And so as a competitor, you don't have any skin in that game yet, because if AI is not throwing something up, like you might also want to look at XYZ company, then how do you stand out in that area?
Yeah, it's gonna sound contrary, but the answer isn't let's do more content. The answer is let's make sure we have the right pieces of content to address the buyer's need at that stage and located in the areas where the buyer is most likely to find it. My favorite thing in the world is a sales team that goes, ooh, 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 we just got listed in the Gartner Magic Quadrant report. Let's go blast that to everybody. That is exactly the wrong move, right? So content plays a really critical role because our buyers want to go ahead and self-educate, but that content needs to be focused. If you think about the buyer's journey and you think about the first two stages right here, right? This is all about the problem set. Don't talk about product. Don't talk about who you are. Don't talk about the greatest thing. It's not until you get to the assess phase that they're even going to be able to listen to you. And oh, by the way, that Gartner report is really going to come in handy when you're trying to convince everybody else in the agency or the company that your decision was the right one. But up here, it is focusing specifically on the problem. So what I like to say to folks is, content is king, but only if it's the right content delivered in the right place to the right person. You got to know who you're talking to and where they are in the stage.
Yeah, that's a great answer, Gina. Great question.
Yeah.
You know, one thing that I've taken away, Gina, from this conversation with Juliana is we talk about this all the time at the Institute for Excellence in Sales. If you're a professional, you got to be a professional, right? So that means, what is the sales professional now doing when, right? You know, it used to be all the skills and methodology and process. We talk about training at the Institute for presentation skills at the Institute and using social media, et cetera. But what we're learning here is sales professional has to be a professional here, 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 and here. Part of it is working with marketing to ensure that the right content is created for the customer, because you know, the sales professionals know the customer more than marketing does. Marketing knows the industry, hopefully, but the sales professionals should know, if I'm covering this agency, they need to know what the budget looks like, the mission, the politics, the challenges that have occurred. And you mentioned a good answer in the very beginning, Juliana. One of the things with government is that things happen: wars, hurricanes, weather-related issues, disasters, crimes, perhaps, and that leads an agency to need different types of skills and different types of technology. I want to thank you very much. Again, Gina and I got so much out of your game presentation and out of your Carousel Partner Summit presentation. So thank you for sharing this great information today. And we're very excited to have gotten deeper into this, and we look forward to continuing to work with you moving forward. I want you to kind of wrap up with a relatively simple answer, not simple, but concise. What is your main message to marketing? You deal in the marketing world. And what is your main message to sales leaders and sales professionals? If you're on an elevator and you saw a marketing director for a well-known tech company, and they said, Juliana, what do I need to know? And then same thing for sales professionals.
Sure. On the marketing side, what I would tell you is you have to get beyond segment and line of business versus IT. You have to understand the persona that you're marketing to at a deeper level. So that's step one. For the sales leaders and sales professionals out there, what I would tell you is understand that your role has changed. Your job is not to be the information or the education concierge. Your job is to be the trusted advisor who brings valuable insights above and beyond your company and your product, because they're going to find that information on their own, to the table. Focus on the relationship and bring those insights that are relevant to their problems and challenges in their agency.
Yeah, and Gina, before I ask you for your final thoughts, I want to let people who are watching this or listening, we run, Gina and I, the Sales Game Changers podcast. We're well over 700 episodes. We've had over 6 million interactions. We post shows once, twice, maybe 3 times a week. If you're a marketer listening to this, we'd love to have you come on the show with one of your sales leaders.
Yeah.
We'd love to be able to have that conversation now that we're talking about how, all these new observations about where people should be. We'd love to have you and your sales leader on the show. If you're a partner or alliance person listening or watching, we'd love to have you on the show as well. Gina, we've gotten so much great information here from Juliana. Just kind of curious on what your final thoughts are.
Well, my final thought is we need to do this again, and then we need to talk about not the marketing people and the sales people, but what can organizations, companies do to make sure the environment is correct to allow the right pollinization, and new world order, if you will, on this. And because that is something we hear too, is that, nothing has changed policy process wise necessarily within the organizations, and individuals aren't necessarily free to make those changes on their own. So I can see a whole other conversation on this, right? Where sales leaders, marketing leaders that run these organizations need to start working together and make it possible for their teams to do so.
That's a great point. And, one thing that we talked about, you and I both, and Juliana came from the sales and marketing world, and it's, the partnership between sales and marketing. And, I referred to a Harvard Business Review article from 2004, how to end the war between sales and marketing. Companies, you don't have time for that. You're doing your customers a disservice by not approaching the government buyers framework, the journey framework that we're talking about here, on providing the value for the customer where they need it and when they need it. And all these places are coming together. All right. Once again, I want to thank Juliana Slye from GBR for being on today's LinkedIn Live. For people who watched us, we're getting a whole bunch of thank yous here. We appreciate it. Again, if you're listening to this as a Sales Game Changers podcast, thank you as well. Thanks, Juliana. Thanks, Gina. My name is Fred Diamond.